I used to believe that the smartest people naturally made the best decisions. That intelligence alone was the ticket to a good life. But life, in its brutally honest way, taught me something completely different. The most valuable skill in the world is not brilliance, it's correct thinking, and most people never learn how to do it. What still surprises me is how few individuals ever question the way their own mind operates. They trust their thoughts simply because their thoughts feel convincing. They mistake emotional certainty for accuracy. They think clarity is automatic just because they want it to be. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Your mind is built for survival, not clarity. And if you don't train it deliberately, it will mislead you at the exact moment you need it most. When I was young, I didn't know any of this. I moved through life, reacting instead of thinking, acting on impulse instead of judgment. And every time I did, the consequences reminded me that wishful thinking is the most expensive form of ignorance. I didn't fail because I lacked information. I failed because I never questioned the way I interpreted that information. The turning point came slowly. I began noticing that whenever I acted out of emotion, the results were poor. But whenever I paused, examined my assumptions, and forced myself to consider more than one explanation, the outcomes improved dramatically. That pattern was too consistent to ignore. It taught me that thinking correctly is not about being brilliant. It's about reducing the odds of being wrong. And reducing error starts with humility. People imagine humility is some soft, philosophical virtue. It isn't. It's a practical tool. You cannot learn anything if you're certain you already know. Most people lose the battle with reality before it even begins because they confuse confidence with correctness. They cling to their first explanation simply because it feels satisfying. But a satisfying story is not the same as a true one. The first real shift in my life happened the day I stopped treating my conclusions as certainties and started treating them as hypotheses. Hypotheses can be revised. Certainties cannot. And refusing to revise your thinking is the fastest way to guarantee you remain wrong. As I grew older, I noticed something else. Correct thinking is rare, not because people are incapable of it, but because it requires effort, discipline, and the willingness to be uncomfortable. The mind prefers shortcuts, familiar explanations, and comforting illusions. It prefers the story that flatters you, not the one that challenges you. But the story that challenges you is the only one aligned with reality. I watched extremely intelligent people make catastrophic decisions for one simple reason. They trusted the way they thought more than the truth right in front of them. They let emotion disguise itself as logic. They let pride masquerade as confidence. And they paid the price. Intelligence is not protection. Correct thinking is protection. And correct thinking begins the moment you stop trying to be right and start trying to avoid being wrong. My early exposure to mathematics taught me something essential. Reality doesn't care about your feelings. Numbers don't change because you're optimistic. They don't bend because you're confident. They expose sloppy thinking immediately. Mathematics taught me that clarity is earned, not assumed. Later, law taught me something equally important. Two intelligent people can look at the same facts and reach completely different conclusions. Not because one is smarter, but because reality is multi-layered. It demands multiple lenses, not one. That realization changed the entire direction of my life. I saw that the greatest danger wasn't ignorance. The greatest danger was relying on a single lens, a single discipline, a single mental framework. The economist who tries to explain everything through incentives gets trapped. The psychologist who sees everything through emotion gets trapped. The engineer who sees everything as structure gets trapped. The narrow mind fails not because it's wrong, but because it's incomplete. Correct thinking requires multiple models, a kind of mental toolkit. One tool cannot solve every problem, but the right combination can protect you from catastrophic error. As I continued learning, I noticed an even deeper problem. The mind loves consistency more than truth. It returns to familiar beliefs simply because they feel comfortable. It seeks explanations that make you feel good, not explanations that help you act wisely. And if you don't push against that instinct, you will keep repeating the same mistakes, while imagining you've grown wiser. The breakthrough came when I forced myself to gather models from as many disciplines as possible: mathematics for precision, psychology for human behavior, economics for incentives, biology for systems, history for cycles. Each one revealed something the others missed. Each one prevented me from becoming trapped inside my own expertise. Looking back, I can say this with absolute certainty. Correct thinking is not about adding brilliance, it's about subtracting blindness. And the fastest way to remove blindness is to accept that your first interpretation is usually your worst. The mind shows you the version of reality that you emotionally prefer, long before it shows you the version that is actually true. If you act on that first interpretation, you're not thinking, you're reacting. And reaction is the enemy of good judgment. The most valuable shift in my life began when I stopped assuming my thoughts were accurate and started assuming they were flawed until proven otherwise. That simple change separated me from the vast majority of people who suffer unnecessary misery simply because they never examine the stories their mind creates. Correct thinking is not a natural state. It is a craft, a discipline, a lifelong practice. As I kept learning, one lesson became clearer than any other. No single way of thinking is enough to understand the world. People fail not because they lack information, but because they rely on one narrow framework to interpret everything. They become prisoners of their own specialty, and a mind trapped in one discipline is a mind destined for repeated misjudgment. I saw this everywhere. The economist who tries to solve every problem with incentives, the psychologist who interprets everything through emotion, the engineer who assumes structure alone explains the world, the lawyer who thinks every conflict can be resolved through argument and precedent. None of them are wrong, but all of them are incomplete. Reality does not present itself in disciplines. It does not tell you which mental tools to use. If your mind is limited to one lens, you will misjudge problems that require another. The world is complex, but clarity emerges when you have multiple models, a latticework of ideas, strong enough to keep you from falling into the traps that pure intelligence cannot protect you from. Mathematics taught me precision. Law taught me interpretation, and psychology taught me humility. Biology taught me evolution and decay. Economics taught me incentives. History taught me that human nature repeats itself endlessly. Each discipline revealed a different part of reality. But the real magic came from combining them. When one model disagreed with another, that tension forced me to see the situation more accurately. When multiple models pointed in the same direction, I knew the judgment was sound. Most people never experience this level of thinking because they cling to the same comfortable explanations every time. The mind loves familiarity. It prefers the story you've told yourself for years, even when reality has moved on. But thinking correctly requires the opposite. It requires stepping into uncertainty. It requires asking whether another model explains the situation better than the one you instinctively want to use. Correct thinking begins the moment you stop relying on a single tool and start collecting many, not to look impressive, but to avoid blindness. But the real test came when life forced me to confront something far harsher than intellectual puzzles. In my early adulthood, I believed that if I gathered enough information, applied enough effort, and used enough logic, I could protect myself from disaster. Life corrected me swiftly and painfully. My first marriage failed, teaching me that intelligence does not prevent emotional blindness. I lost most of what I had financially, teaching me that effort does not guarantee security. And when my son died at the age of 9, I learned that the world does not spare you just because you think you are prepared. Those years shattered every illusion I had about certainty. They stripped away the belief that clear thinking was optional. They forced me to build a way of thinking strong enough to withstand pressure, grief, and chaos, a way of thinking that did not collapse simply because life did. Before those experiences, I assumed success was proof of correct thinking. After them, I understood something far more sobering. Success often hides bad judgment, and failure exposes reality. When life is comfortable, You can mistake luck for logic. You can convince yourself your decisions are solid simply because the outcome is pleasant. But when everything falls apart, there's nowhere for your illusions to hide. You finally see whether your thinking was ever built on truth. Pain became my teacher, not because it made me wise, but because it removed the comforting stories my mind used to hide from reality. During hardship, the brain doesn't search for truth. It searches for relief. It clings to explanations that soothe rather than explain. It wants certainty, even when certainty is a lie. I saw clearly how easily people distort reality when they are desperate to avoid pain, how emotion disguises itself as logic, how fear pretends to be caution, how pride pretends to be conviction. Once I understood this, my entire approach to judgment changed. I learned that correct thinking requires separating what is real from what your emotions want to be real. And the moment your emotions are loud, your thoughts are unreliable. I began forcing myself to slow down when everything inside me demanded speed. I questioned my assumptions when certainty felt seductive. I refused to trust conclusions formed in moments of intensity. It wasn't easy, but the alternative was worse, letting temporary feelings dictate permanent decisions. As I rebuilt my life piece by piece, I recognized a pattern. Correct thinking emerges from the repeated practice of not giving in to your first reaction. Your first reaction is emotional, protective, and impulsive. Correct thinking requires moving past that into the territory where discomfort lives, the territory where truth hides. Hardship became the catalyst for my clarity. Comfort allows illusions to survive. Pain removes them. And once those illusions fall away, you stop believing intelligence is enough. You see that the most valuable skill in the world is not brilliance. It's the ability to remain rational when every emotional instinct is screaming at you to do the opposite. Thinking correctly is often misunderstood as the ability to come up with brilliant ideas. But in reality, it is mostly the ability to avoid foolish ones. Good judgment is not built on genius. It's built on reducing error. The world rewards those who make fewer big mistakes, not those who entertain the most impressive thoughts. Most disasters in life come from unforced errors, decisions made impulsively without reflection, driven by ego or wishful thinking. Once I understood this, my entire goal shifted. I stopped trying to be clever and started trying to be less stupid. That simple shift improved my life more than any increase in intelligence ever could. Correct thinking begins with brutal honesty. It grows through humility, and it survives through discipline. As I continued to develop my thinking, I learned that intelligence alone cannot save you from error. Most people believe they're thinking clearly because their thoughts feel accurate, but feeling accurate and being accurate are two entirely different things. The mind is built to mislead long before it reveals truth. And unless you understand how easily it can distort reality, you will trust ideas that are comforting rather than correct. I didn't come to this understanding by reading theories in psychology. I came to it by watching intelligent individuals, including myself, make avoidable mistakes simply because we were unaware of the forces shaping our judgments. It became clear that the real obstacle to correct thinking wasn't ignorance. It was the mind's hidden mechanisms that push us toward convenient beliefs instead of true ones. The first distortion I noticed was confirmation bias. The mind does not seek truth. It seeks agreement. Once a person forms an opinion, they begin collecting evidence that supports it while quietly ignoring anything that contradicts it. I saw this repeatedly in business. Executives defended failing ideas, not because the ideas made sense, but because their pride was invested in them. They wanted to be right more than they wanted to learn. The belief came first, the reasoning came afterward. I realized that if I wanted correct thinking, I had to reverse that process. I had to train myself to look for disconfirming evidence, information that challenged my assumptions rather than comforted them. It was uncomfortable, but the discomfort was the price of accuracy. Reality does not reward you for consistency with your past. It rewards you for aligning with truth, even when that truth is inconvenient. Another powerful distortion came from social influence. People like to imagine they are independent thinkers, but human beings are deeply shaped by what others are doing. If everyone around you is excited about an idea, skepticism becomes difficult. If everyone is fearful, calm judgment becomes almost impossible. The crowd's emotions feel contagious. They create the illusion of certainty. But following the crowd rarely leads to good thinking. The crowd is not thoughtful. It is reactive. And reacting to the crowd is one of the most reliable ways to lose your judgment. I learned that correct thinking requires a willingness to be indifferent to the behavior of others. You must be able to stand alone in your reasoning, even when everyone around you is moving in a different direction. That is far harder than it sounds. But the alternative is worse, letting your judgment be replaced by the noise of the masses. Another distortion I studied was the mind's craving for consistency. Once people commit to an idea or course of action, they feel psychological discomfort when faced with evidence that contradicts it. Instead of adjusting, they double down. They become more certain when they should be less. This tightening grip on old beliefs is one of the most dangerous patterns in human thinking. So I trained myself to remain flexible. If new information appeared, I changed my mind without embarrassment. That didn't make me indecisive. It made me rational. Correct thinking is not about defending identity. It's about finding truth. And truth does not care about your past opinions. It cares only about your current alignment with reality. I began to understand that the goal of correct thinking is not to eliminate bias entirely. That is impossible. The goal is to create enough awareness to prevent your mind from becoming your enemy. The world is challenging enough without adding self-inflicted stupidity to it. Once I recognized how vulnerable the mind is to distortion, I understood something deeper. Good judgment is not about making more decisions. It's about making fewer bad ones. The mind is tempted to respond to everything, every opportunity, every impulse, every bit of noise. But activity without filtering is chaos, and chaos destroys clarity faster than ignorance ever could. Correct thinking requires selectivity. It requires the discipline to pause, to evaluate, to eliminate choices long before they become mistakes. I discovered that the greatest advantage often comes from refusing to act when the conditions are wrong. The world rewards selectivity, not movement. Many people mistake activity for progress. They move quickly because they fear appearing slow. They act because doing nothing feels uncomfortable. But impulsive action is the breeding ground for regret. One of the most useful realizations of my life was that complexity is usually a sign of poor understanding. If a decision required elaborate justification, it was almost always a bad decision disguised as an appealing one. Good decisions tend to be simple, not because the world is simple, but because truth does not require decoration. I began asking myself a few quiet questions. Do I truly understand this? Is it within my circle of competence? Would I be comfortable owning the consequences if everything went wrong? If the answer to any of those questions was unclear, I passed. People think passing is weakness. In reality, passing is discipline. Every refusal protects you from future regret. A wise refusal saves far more than a clever decision ever earns. I also realized that most errors occur at the beginning of the decision process, not the end. If you allow low-quality options into your life, in investments, relationships, or habits, no amount of analysis can save you. Filtering early prevents complexity later. It reduces the number of situations that require heroic intelligence to escape. Another part of filtering involved embracing my own limitations. People get into trouble when they believe they must have an opinion about everything. But thinking correctly requires the willingness to say, "I don't know." Those 3 words are among the most intelligent in any language. They protect you from arrogance. They protect you from haste. They prevent you from pretending to understand something you do not. The world pressures people to respond quickly, to appear decisive, to act with confidence even when they are uncertain. But correctness does not care about speed. It cares about alignment with reality. Slowing down reduced the number of irreversible mistakes in my life more effectively than any increase in intelligence ever could. Over time, this habit shaped not only how I made decisions, but how I viewed opportunity itself. The best opportunities in life are rare, and if you are already committed to something mediocre, you will not have the capacity to seize them. Filtering is what keeps you available for what truly matters. As my thinking continued to evolve, I began to understand that the quality of judgment depends heavily on the people you allow into your life. Most individuals assume that thinking is a solo endeavor, something done entirely within the mind. But in reality, the environment you build around yourself shapes your thoughts in ways you often don't realize. When I look back at my partnership with Warren Buffett, people love to imagine it was built on extraordinary genius. But the truth is far simpler. We succeeded not because we were brilliant, but because we thought correctly together. Most partnerships fail, not from lack of talent, but from lack of temperament. Two intelligent people can destroy each other if their egos are louder than their judgment. What made our collaboration powerful was a shared commitment to seeing reality clearly. We did not rely on flattery, emotional reassurance, or polite agreement. If an idea was foolish, we said so plainly. If a decision didn't make sense, we questioned it without drama. Removing ego from evaluation became one of the most valuable habits of our working life. Correct thinking is almost impossible if you feel the need to protect your pride. Having a partner who thinks independently but rationally multiplies your clarity. Most people are blindest to their own flaws. A partner who challenges your assumptions without hostility forces you to remain honest. We never encouraged each other's illusions. We dismantled them. If one of us became excited about an idea the other didn't fully understand, the default response wasn't persuasion, it was restraint. The rule was simple. If either of us lacked conviction, we did nothing. That single discipline protected us from countless mistakes. The world rewards activity, but activity without clarity is just noise. Together we learned to sit still while others rushed into opportunities driven by excitement rather than understanding. Our calm wasn't laziness, it was controlled ambition directed only toward situations that made unmistakable sense. Another advantage of our partnership was trust. In many relationships, time and energy are wasted managing insecurity, competition, or suspicion. But we never had to wonder whether the other person was acting for personal gain at the expense of the whole. That absence of friction freed our minds for the only thing that mattered: judgment. Correct thinking requires mental bandwidth, and unnecessary conflict consumes it. The absence of internal conflict became one of our greatest strategic advantages. It allowed us to focus entirely on the accuracy of the decision rather than the emotions surrounding it. Looking back, I realized that rationality scales when shared, and stupidity multiplies when shared. Two calm minds outperform one brilliant but emotional mind. This principle extends far beyond business. The quality of your thinking is influenced by the people you choose to involve in your life. If you surround yourself with individuals who encourage impulse, ego, or speed, your judgment will deteriorate. But if you surround yourself with people who value clarity over pride, you will think better almost automatically. As time passed, I noticed that correct thinking wasn't only essential for business or investing, it shaped every part of life. People imagine that their struggles come from dramatic failures. But in reality, most long-term problems are born from small, preventable mistakes repeated consistently without reflection. A person who cannot think clearly will stay in the wrong relationship because emotion replaces judgment. They will pursue a career that drains them because social pressure replaces self-awareness. They will consume distractions because urgency replaces priority. Most suffering in life is not inevitable. It is the compound effect of decisions made without examining your own thinking. In relationships, the biggest mistakes often come from ignoring reality in favor of hope. People convince themselves that someone will change despite years of evidence to the contrary. They stay because comfort feels safer than clarity. But correct thinking requires judging behavior, not intention. It means accepting what is true, even when it feels unkind. Kindness without clarity leads to misery. Clarity without kindness leads to cruelty. The goal is to combine both, to see reality accurately while responding to it with decency. The same pattern applies to health. Most people do not ruin themselves through a single catastrophic choice. They do it through years of small neglects, unexamined habits, postponed responsibilities, and the quiet belief that consequences will arrive later, but later eventually disappears. Correct thinking means understanding that small decisions compound just as powerfully in biology as they do in finance. I learned that if you wait for crisis to force clarity, the cost is often irreversible. Thinking correctly means acting before pain forces you to. It means recognizing that prevention is easier than repair. It means refusing to lie to yourself simply because the truth feels inconvenient. Time was another domain transformed by clear thinking. People behave as if time is limitless. They spend it on obligations they don't value, distractions they don't enjoy, and pursuits they don't remember. It took me years to understand that the most important skill is not time management, it is attention management. Thinking correctly means asking not, how do I fit everything in? But, what is worth doing at all? Most of what drains a life comes from refusing to eliminate what is unimportant. The world offers endless noise disguised as opportunity, but opportunity is not measured by quantity. It is measured by alignment with purpose. Clear thinking protects you from trading your life for things that do not matter. Looking back, I realized that rationality is not an academic achievement. It is a daily practice. It determines the direction of your life. It shapes your relationships, your health, your time, and your character. Correct thinking will not prevent hardship, but it will prevent the kind of hardship that comes from self-inflicted errors. It will not guarantee success, but it will protect you from the disasters that ruin people who move through the world without examining their assumptions. It gives you a life that does not collapse unnecessarily, and that, more than any philosophy, strategy, or secret, is why clear thinking remains one of the most powerful advantages a person can possess. As the years passed, I began to understand something that would shape the rest of my thinking. The world becomes more chaotic, but correct thinking becomes more valuable. People assume progress makes clarity easier. They believe information solves confusion. But in reality, the explosion of information has made clarity harder than ever. When I was young, knowledge was scarce, and people believed that more information would automatically lead to better decisions. Today, knowledge is abundant, yet clear thinking has become rare. People drown in facts, opinions, predictions, noise, and emotional triggers. And instead of becoming wiser, they become more reactive. The world has become faster, louder, and more restless. Human nature hasn't changed at all. We still prefer comfort over truth, speed over reflection, and reassurance over accuracy. That combination makes clear thinking essential for survival in a way I never imagined when I was young. I watch people confuse exposure with understanding. They believed that because they consumed endless content, they were thinking. But consuming is not thinking. Repeating is not thinking. Thinking requires the ability to step back from the noise, to evaluate reality without being pushed, pulled, and shaped by every voice around you. Technology didn't make thinking obsolete. It made thinking indispensable. The greatest threat to clarity is not ignorance. It is distraction. A distracted mind cannot form durable conclusions. It jumps from idea to idea, opinion to opinion, emotion to emotion. It never sits long enough with a question to understand it. People become spectators of information, not owners of thought. They react to everything and understand almost nothing. Correct thinking requires stillness, the ability to remain with a problem long enough for clarity to appear. That skill is becoming rare, and anything rare becomes valuable. The world is full of noise, and noise destroys judgment. Clarity is earned by those who are willing to slow down when others speed up. As time went on, I realized that thinking correctly does not age. Trends change, theories fade, technologies become obsolete, but the principles that reduce error remain constant. Avoiding self-deception will matter in every generation. Accepting evidence that contradicts your beliefs will matter in every generation. refusing to be controlled by envy, fear, and social pressure will matter in every generation. Human nature does not evolve as quickly as our tools. The same psychological traps that ruined judgment 50 years ago ruin judgment today, only now they spread much faster. That makes rationality a rarer advantage, not a weaker one. Another lesson that became clear is that correct thinking lives or dies on your ability to filter. The world rewards people who protect their attention. The mind cannot function when it is constantly interrupted. Distraction is not a minor inconvenience. It is a cognitive tax that steals clarity, depth, patience, and accuracy. People who cannot filter end up chasing every opportunity, reacting to every idea, and allowing every stimulus to shape their judgment. But a person who filters, who eliminates noise, who protects their mind from unnecessary input, that person becomes powerful. Not because they know everything, but because what they know is clear. Correct thinking is not about collecting more opinions. It is about removing the ones that distort reality. Another realization came as I grew older. Correct thinking is a discipline, not a talent. People imagine that rationality is something you master once and then possess forever. But the mind drifts. It becomes lazy. It looks for shortcuts, certainty, comfort, and familiarity. Without continuous effort, clarity fades. Thinking correctly is like maintaining your health. You don't do it once, you practice it daily. You guard it, you protect it, you renew it. What mattered most was not brilliance, but awareness. The willingness to notice when my thinking was beginning to slide into emotion, impatience, or ego. Correct thinking meant pausing before reacting, questioning conclusions that felt too satisfying, and recognizing that my first interpretation was often the least reliable. I accepted that I would never be perfectly rational, but I could become less foolish over time. Small improvements repeated consistently create extraordinary results. Clear thinking follows the same rule. You do not need to be brilliant, you need to be honest. You do not need to know everything. You need to see what is in front of you without distortion. You do not need heroic discipline. You need the humility to update your beliefs when the facts change. One of the deepest truths I learned is that most of the advantage in life comes from what you refuse to do. I refuse to let urgency replace judgment. I refuse to let pride silence evidence. I refuse to let emotion dictate decisions that reason should handle. I refuse to let the world rush me into mistakes. People imagine that wisdom is about accumulating more ideas, but real wisdom often comes from subtraction, from removing the illusions, impulses, and assumptions that cloud reality. Thinking correctly is not an endless search for complexity. It is a continuous removal of distortion. You clear away the noise until the world becomes visible. You clear away the ego until truth becomes tolerable. You clear away the fear until decisions can be made without panic. What I want you to understand is simple. Correct thinking is available to anyone who is willing to slow down, remain honest, and tolerate the discomfort that clarity demands. You do not need extraordinary intelligence to live a good life. You need the courage to see reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Clear thinking will not guarantee a perfect life, but it will prevent you from destroying the one you have. It will protect your relationships. It will protect your time. It will protect your health. It will protect your judgment. And if you protect that skill, it will protect you for as long as you live. The greatest advantage you can have, greater than wealth, talent, or opportunity, is the rare ability to think without distortion. Everything else depends on it. Everything else depends on it. And it is the most valuable skill in the world because everything else, judgment, relationships, decisions, success, and even peace of mind, depends on it.